Kind of have my deal shining over there at my little sign I'm making. How's it going?
Oh, it's going good, man. It's funny. Like 10 minutes before you messaged me, this helicopter was flying around my house, and I live out in the middle of the country, man. So I'm not even on a flight path.
Wow, what did it look like?
I couldn't even. That's the weird thing. I could hear it and I could see the light, like a red light on it, but I couldn't actually. It must have been black because it's nighttime. I couldn't actually see it. Just had a little red light on it, but it was loud. It
Wow.
was like,
Now, you say it's nighttime. Are you outside right now?
uh, I'm in my house right now.
Oh, okay, because just the stones behind you and everything kind of give the impression that you're like in an outdoor patio.
No, I just bought my first house, and it's straight from the '70s. The decor.
What is it? It's the back of your set or what?
Oh, it's actually just my wall. That's fake rock, from the '70s when they used to have like
Oh,
the
yeah, I remember
yeah,
that. Like on the outside of houses, it was like made out of like it looks like plastic or something, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't look. It looks like rock.
yeah. It's wood. It's wood.
Yeah, yeah, man. It fooled me, man. I thought you were outside, and I was like, man, it doesn't look very very dark to me out there.
Yeah.
Are we in the same time zone?
I'm Eastern time.
Okay. Yeah, I'm. Yeah. So it's an hour. I guess later over there than it is here in
Yeah.
Texas. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad that I'm glad was able to catch you. Before you got to your other activities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is a good idea to just do an introduction because just get the background out of the way now, and then that next time I can just get into like my timeline in detail.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea because that way, in the next video, we can refer to that if the viewers have any questions, they can just refer back to this first video. And we can on this one we can cover a lot of the core concepts and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I was able to look over that that sheet you sent me, and of course I can even, if you like, I can put this you know up for the viewers to see at some point during the video. Or
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be all right. I think it's okay with Anthony. He shared that with me. He shared that with a couple other people too. So I think he should be okay with sharing that.
okay, cool. Well then, that being said,
Yeah.
welcome to another exciting episode of You Don't Know. You don't know, huh? So don't act like you do. All right. On tonight's show from Canada, is that right?
Yep. Ontario, Canada.
Ontario, Canada, we have Kevin Trimmel, a member of the Secret Space Program, who rightly or wrongly has also been called a super soldier, and that we're going to go into depth on that and the reasons for that, and get Kevin's experiences in the secret space program, excuse me, and just try to get a hold on this thing. Now, first of all, let me say there's no refuting that there's a secret space program. I mean, the very nature of space itself is cloaked in secrecy and has been from the very beginning. And with this secret space program that we're hearing about from various different people, we're getting one narrative that we can understand, but it's not completely unified. Well, but then again, let's look at the narrative of the Teamsters unions. Look at the narrative of elementary school, something like that. Everybody has their own perspective, and so we're going to find out from eyewitness testimony, firsthand account, right here tonight. Kevin Trimmel is going to tell us about the secret space program. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm gonna just jump right into my background here. What I wanted to cover in this introduction was the times I've been picked up by the TR3. Now, the TR3 I'm familiar with, and this has to do with the Canadian forces. We use a white TR3. It's a scaled-down version of the black TR3 Astra that most people are familiar with. This is a scaled-down version of that. It's a small white triangular-shaped craft. And what happened was when I was 19 years old, on November 12th, 2008, I was mountain biking in a forest close to where I lived at the time in Cambridge, Ontario. And it was about 3:30 in the afternoon on a sun and cloud day. And I took a break on my bicycle, and all of a sudden the sky went dark. So I thought a cloud had blown overhead and blocked out the sun. So I look up, and right over top of me is the white TR3 hovering just above the treetops. I knew right away that it was a man-made craft because you could see paneling on it. It wasn't just one piece. You could actually see the paneling on it. It had been fitted together. It was just hovering there, and it started moving at a walking pace. So I actually walked my bicycle along the trail and was able to keep up with it. And I walked underneath this thing for 5 minutes along the trail until the trail opened up into a field. And once I got out into the field, it started to rise up into the air, and that's when I got hit with this wave of nausea. And that's actually when they took me. And it's literally in a blink of an eye. There's no real realization of it. As fast as you can blink, next thing you know, you're inside the craft. There was no, aside from some nausea, there was no real realization of it. But for the sake of this introduction, I'm not going to get into what happened next. I just want to cover the times the craft has come and picked me up. So what happened was in March of 2015, it was March 25th at 3:45 in the morning. I was meditating on my couch, and all of a sudden the backyard lit up, and there's a sliding glass door, and the backyard lights up, and I look outside, and the white TR3 came back, and it cruises over the backyard, a little higher up than this time than the first time, but it was cruised fairly low across the backyard. And so I just watched it go off into the distance, and then I actually stood there kind of in shock, behind the glass door, and I stood there for a couple of minutes, and I thought to myself, I wonder if it's going to come back. And sure enough, it did. It came back at exactly 4 a.m., so 15 minutes later, it comes cruising back. And I found out from a higher self-channeling session I did with Carl Mollison years later, which we made public on Denny Hunt's YouTube channel, why this is true. I asked Carl what actually happened that night, and he went into this description, channeling my higher self, which is to say my future self, that I had been abducted again that night, but I wasn't conscious of it that time. And then the next night, so this is the very next night, the craft at 3:45 a.m. came back again and did the same thing at 3:45. Cruises across backyard, comes back at 4 a.m. and I was taken a second time, 2 nights in a row. So the point I'm trying to make is that in 2008, when I was picked up, after I got dropped back off, within a couple weeks, I started getting the flashbacks, the night terrors, remembering what had happened to me when I had been abducted. But when it came back in 2015, the blank slating was effective that time, and the next time, the very next night, it was effective again. So, and this happens a lot with experiencers. They'll do a term, like an SSP term, and sometimes the blank slating is effective, and sometimes it's not. The percentage seems to be 95% of the time you don't remember, but there's a 5% chance you will remember. So I've been taken 3 times, and I can remember 1 of those times, and that would be the timeline that I'll get into next time. But I have been taken twice since then, and I don't remember those terms. Another thing I wanted to cover in this introduction is the question, like, why me? Why was I taken? And I did some research into my family, and on my mother's side, I found out that my great-uncle Bill, he served in the Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy during World War II. He made it to the rank of lieutenant and was a communications officer. He's a part of the bridge crew, and he also served in Korea. And what's also interesting is I found out because of his military service, he became a 3rd-degree Freemason, and I have his Masonic Royal Canadian Navy ring. Hopefully you can see that. I'll send you some photos of it close up.
Yeah,
but
I can see it.
It's got some cool symbolism because it's a winged sun disk, like an Egyptian sun disk with a lightning bolt going through it. Wow. And I'll talk about the symbolism of that later. Okay. And then this is just his regular. So this is that one was the Navy one, and then that's why it says RCN on it for Royal Canadian Navy. And then this is just the regular 3rd-degree Mason ring in gold that he also had. And then I might as well just show these. These are his war medals from Korea and World War II.
Oh, wow. He must have been pretty decorated.
Yeah, I mean, serving in 2 wars
Yeah.
as a communications officer, he was part of the bridge crew. And what's interesting about that is this goes back to like my role within the SSP. I was tested as an empathic, and so I was put into a communications program. But except it was one step beyond in the sense that they were gearing us up to actually interface with various ETs that communicate telepathically. So you had to be empathic, and they teach you how to do the entrainment. And the entrainment is the process where you actually communicate with these beings telepathically. And the sensation is, when you look at them, the sensation is that you're being pulled into their eyes. And you actually have to train you how to do that. It's a weird feeling because you feel like when they're actually doing the entrainment, you kind of feel like you're getting pulled towards them, but you get hit with this dizzy feeling like you're about to faint. And it actually takes a lot of practice and strength and energy to actually not faint. And they tell you that if you do faint or lose consciousness during the entrainment, because that's how powerful these beings are mentally, it can be damaging. You can have almost like a stroke. So there were some instances when I was interfacing with various beings where I was literally gripping and white knuckling the table and shaking like a leaf, trying to hang on, and the being was just staring at me, perfectly calm. It was easy for them because that's how they communicate. But for me, it took like every ounce of strength I had not to faint when they would actually do the entrainment. And so I'll talk more about that later. I think that's actually a pretty good little introduction. Unless you have any questions for me.
Well, no, that's an excellent introduction. Now, I looked at the information that you gave me that the man, had given to you, and having to do with the frequency chart and the different roles and jobs of service that they have in the secret space program, and all this reference to frequency somehow to me was reminiscent of Hattie Bow. Have you heard of Hattie Bow?
No, I haven't.
Well, Hattie Bow was just a Russian scientist who they think has probably been assassinated by now, but Crow 777 is the one that they sent the Hattie Bow information to. But basically, Hattie Bow discovered that there's just a mathematical frequency-based relationship in all this stuff, having to do with the Earth and the Moon and all this stuff. And it just kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, right on. That document. Anthony Zender sent me that, and I've done roundtables with him. A lot of people are familiar with him. He's a true super soldier. He is an ex-Marine MMA fighter. He's affiliated with Kruger, which is one of the SSP factions, and so he's a true super soldier. And that's why I just wanted to make that clear that I am not a super soldier. I'm an abductee. That was tested and used for my empathic abilities, and I would be considered a civilian asset because they need empaths. And you can train a soldier, you can train a technician, an engineer, you can even train a doctor, but an empath is a little different. And if there's a shortage, they will abduct civilians who have that empathic ability. And then in terms of their selection process, they're really fascinated by World War II families or anybody who has any kind of military history. If they have any relatives that served in a military capacity and they test as an empath, then you kind of make it to the top of the list.
Okay. Did you know that you were an empath before all of this?
I suspected because I do feel very deeply, and I will say that I do have an emotional intelligence that I've noticed, especially with men. Men typically don't have an emotional intelligence the same way women do. Women are very receptive. They feel a lot deeper, and they have just a wider range of emotion, and they're more expressive when they talk. And I've been told that, like, I admit I kind of talk like a woman in the sense that I'm very expressive, and I talk a lot with my hands, and my vocabulary is a little wider, and I talk fast, and that's actually like a female trait when they communicate. I've noticed with men, if you ask them how they are, they'll just be like, good, fine, sup. They answer in like one-word responses or one-sentence responses, where if you ask a woman how she is or how her day is, she tells you this big whole story and she talks fast, and that's kind of one of those empath traits in terms of having an emotional intelligence. Where like if you ask a guy how his day went, he'll be like, it was fine or whatever, like it's very abrupt.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There absolutely is a difference between men and women, and there were. After I've been looking at it personally, and also heard some different comments by women and stuff, men do seem to be more kind of one-dimensional. Then women seem to be more, multi-dimensional, definitely more emotional, and so that sounds true.
And another thing too, I also tested with the Myers-Briggs 16 personality type test. The Myers-Briggs test. I'm an INFJ. I tested as an INFJ, which is intuitive, feeling personality, and only 2% of the male population are INFJs. That's usually a female personality type. So as a male INFJ, being introverted, intuitive, and feeling based, that's also kind of a prereq for an empath, definitely.
That makes sense as well. And, it just so happens that I have relationships and professional relationships with several, about maybe, 3 or 4, depending on who you count, of psychics. And only one of them's a man. I'm finding out that most psychics that we hear about are women, So, all right, now, and a lot of them refer to themselves as empaths. And you refer to yourself as empaths. Would you be like the old school definition of what we would call a psychic? Are you psychic?
I'm more empathic, so I'm very receptive. Like if I'm in the room with someone, I feel what they're feeling, and I can also sense good and evil in the room with me. So I'm very much feeling based. I'm not like I don't have that ESP where I know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's totally like a feeling-based psychic ability, being an empath. Although in the program, they did train us in remote viewing as well. And so I was trained as a remote viewer, but I noticed that my remote viewing capability, that only happens in the dream state. I can't really remote view when I'm in my waking life, but when I'm dreaming, I lucid dream all the time, and I'm able to remote view and go back into the past and actually go back and remote view my SSP memories in the dream state, which has been extremely helpful.
Wow, I'll bet. And so, they say a lot of times people don't remember their dreams, but you have a pretty good recall of your dreams.
Every night, I remember every one of my dreams every night, and I would say 90% of the time I am fully lucid, so I'm aware that I'm dreaming, and I've learned to just go with the dream, because if you actually try to resist it, it oftentimes you'll cause yourself to wake up. So I've learned to just let it play out like a movie, and so all the people and everything that's happening around me, just let that play out and go along with it, because I've noticed that when you're in the what you would call the astral space, if you actually say, hey, like this is a dream, the beings around you at that point, they don't like that. They resist that, and usually you'll just wake up. So I've learned to just go along with it and not let the beings around me know that I'm actually aware that I'm dreaming and I'm fully lucid. So that's what I do.
Have you heard this term? I think it might be spelled NOO, the sphere, the noosphere. Have you heard that term of the noosphere?
Like Tim Refat.
Well, that's actually
the noosphere, right?
That's where I was going. So in the complex number space.
Yes. So
Tell me what you know. Tell me what you know about Tim Refat. Tell me what you think about Tim Refat.
I like that he put it into more scientific terms, because I always referred to it as the astral, which is a very new agey kind of way of describing it. I like that he's actually breaking it down into scientific terms and kind of getting away from that new agey type mysticism, which isn't very accurate, because we're dealing with science here. We're dealing with quantum mechanics and even quantum biology. And I like that it's actually breaking it down into scientific terms. So yeah, when I refer to the astral, I am referring to complex number space. Absolutely.
I just started following Tim Refat, and it's fascinating.
Yep.
The people, and I know that you're going to go into this when we do our interview proper, hopefully tomorrow, depending on your availability. But the people, when you're in, do you feel that the people that abducted you, do you feel their emotions too?
Like the human personnel that abducted me. You
Well,
mean?
that's kind of the next question. I just wanted to get a sneak peek into it. Are there aliens in there too, or is it just all people?
What I experienced was the MyLab experience, so military abduction, absolutely, where you have military personnel that abduct you, and but it is a joint human ET secret space program. So they brought us in, they tested us, we went through orientation, then we went through an educational program, training, and then the end, like the final test was when they actually bring you into a room and you get to have your full take, like your first take at looking at an ET, which is extremely. I mean, they try to prep you as much as possible. They you know it's going to happen, and but your physical body, your animal, reacts in this visceral way where the fight or flight thing kicks in because the second you are face to face with an ET for the first time, your body realizes that that is not a part of your regular ecosystem and it freaks out. So your body starts to react and it before your mind has time to play catch up. So you instantly recoil. And I'll just say this briefly. I had one encounter that was extremely traumatic where I encountered a raptor type being. They put me in this room. It looked like a regular break room at like a workplace with a countertop and a kitchen sink and four circular tables set up with chairs. It looked like a normal break room. And they say to me, the being over the intercom, they say, the being will be with you shortly. And at that point, I just assumed that it was going to be like a human being. And this raptor walks in, like exactly what you see in Jurassic Park. It walks in, and I instantly jumped up onto the counter, which I know sounds ridiculous because what's that going to do when you're face to face with a reptilian being like that? But my body just jumped up onto the counter, so I would be a little higher up than it. It walked over to me, it locked eyes with me, did the entrainment, and it said to me, "It's okay." And I'll just end it there. But I wanted to mention that as an example, even with all that training and prepping, the body just freaked out before my mind, the interpreter, could actually say, "Hey, no, this is okay, like it's going to be okay."
Wow, that's amazing. And so this was a physical being.
Absolutely physical.
Wow, yep. Wow. And so, are all the nations do all the nations cooperate with the secret space program? And if they do, then how real are the wars that we are shown on TV and stuff?
Okay, that's a good question. From my experience, my main interactions were with the British Commonwealth faction of the Solar Warden American Navy Secret Space Program. So you have the British Commonwealth, so England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, those countries. They are working with the Solar Warden program as an auxiliary force. They offer logistical support and serve in an auxiliary capacity and in a joint capacity because the main ally of the United States is the British Commonwealth. So that faction is working together, but there's other countries with their own secret space programs. The Russians have their own secret space program. And another example of a country that developed their own secret space program is actually Argentina during the Falklands War. They were approached by a group of small blue grays, and that was the whole Falklands War thing because the Greys directed them to South Thule Island, as we know, and they actually were harvesting the black goo there. And so those small blue grays ended up actually helping the Argentinians to develop their own secret space program in South America. And if you actually look at Argentina at that time, most people wouldn't think of them as a superpower, and they're not a superpower per se, but they actually had an adequate air force at that time. So they made it to a certain level of tech that this group of Greys decided, okay, let's give them a helping hand, just like what happened during World War II with the Germans and the Draco.
Okay, so the Balkans, not the Balkans, the Falkland Island, the crisis, that was in the 80s, I believe. Now, was the secret space program in existence at that time?
The secret space or in terms of just humanity, it goes back to the Germans. The Nazis were the
Okay.
first ones that were approached by the Draco and helped, and that I would say the Germans were the first ones that actually launched a human secret space program. But there's always been an ET secret space program. Obviously, we've never been alone. They've always been here,
Right.
and they were just waiting for us to reach a certain level of tech. And then in the 20s, the Nazi scientists and German scientists, they reached a certain level of tech that the Draco said, okay, they met us halfway, so now we're going to help them out.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Are the Germans part of the Solar Warden group, or are they part of a different group?
They're referred to as Nachwaffen, and they're not a part of the Solar Warden faction of the secret space program. They're doing their own thing. Apparently, they operate outside the solar system and work. They're basically like mercenaries for the Draco, and they kind of had to like sell their soul to survive World War II so they could establish a Fourth Reich, which does have a small presence in Antarctica still, and they have some bases throughout the solar system. But those bases are just launching points or way stations to help them continue to push outwards as a mercenary army force for the Draco.
Okay, well, if one of the Solar Warden ships were to come across one of the Nazi ships, would it be just open fire? Is it open war, or are they just uneasy, truce, or what is it?
Put simply, there's two factions of what people might think of as the Illuminati, and there's the Fourth Reich faction, and then there's the Solar Warden faction and other secret space programs, but they're all run by the Rothschilds in terms of the other countries and Solar Warden that have their secret space programs. The Rothschilds are managing them, and the Rothschilds are at the top of the pyramid. So they control, to some extent, that faction of the Illuminati. But that's why the Fourth Reich operates outside the solar system, because the Rothschilds consider themselves, with their Anunnaki allies, they consider themselves the mid-level managers of our solar system. So they control our solar system, and that's why Solar Warden, its primary purpose is to be like the Coast Guard of the solar system, to keep ET interlopers from coming in here and stealing our resources, stealing our tech, stealing human beings. So that's the role of Solar Warden, and then all the other secret space programs have to kind of fall in line with the Rothschilds at the top. So if you were like Argentina, for example, you're allowed to have your own little secret space program, but you have to fall in line to the Rothschilds. They're at the top of the pyramid in our solar system.
Okay. Now, do the Chinese have a secret space program?
Yes, they do. And that's a Rothschild controlled space program, because the Rothschilds are communistic.
Well, I've got a question. What first of all, are the Anunnaki a physical being? And second of all, what do the Anunnaki look like?
The Anunnaki, I mean, of course, that's a term which means from heaven to earth came from ancient Sumer, so it's like an all-encompassing kind of term. But I know what you mean by your question. The Anunnaki that the Rothschilds are in contact with are actually hybrids. They're half Syrian and half Draco, and they are an artificial being that was created during the Orion Wars hundreds of millions of years ago. And they're the ones that were given our solar system, and our solar system was kind of this experiment. I mean, this goes back to like galactic history, which is a big topic, but to put simply, it's there was this war between the Syrians and the Draco, and the Syrians actually were able to kind of create this standoff where they were going to destroy each other. So the Draco Queen and the Syrian kings decided to create this this hybrid being, just like in medieval times. If you have a neighboring kingdom, you marry off your daughter or son to create an alliance. Well, they did that on a genetic level by creating these hybrids, the Anunnaki. They gave the Anunnaki the solar system as their prize and said, okay, this is the experiment. We're going to try to become allies, just like marrying off your children in medieval times to create an alliance. So they created that alliance, and that's actually what the Anunnaki are in terms of the Syrian Anunnaki that are in contact with the Rothschilds.
Okay, that's fascinating, and that brings me to another question. You know, Stuart Swerdlow has talked about at one time this reptilian shape-shifting museum. Well, I was down in Mexico a couple of years ago and just found myself in that museum. It's a very famous museum that has these Toltec or Olmec heads, those huge heads, and there's a lot of statuary in there of people, human beings transforming into reptiles that walk. You know, statues of this. So, are the Anunnaki, are they shapeshifters?
There's physical Anunnaki, which are fourth density. Third and fourth density occupy the same space, and that's all because there's a lot of confusion about this fourth density. Fourth density just means you're fully telepathic. It has to do with your megahertz level. So you're resonating. Most humans resonate at 60 to 70 megahertz. Once you get to about 350 megahertz and beyond, that's when the bioplasmatic hologram of who you are is resonating at such a high frequency. That's why they are able to actually start tapping into that astral or complex number space. So a fourth density being is still physical, but they have all the psychic abilities we would attribute to like an ascended being. So fully telepathic, telekinetic abilities, all that stuff. So, but some of the Anunnaki, like Anu, they falsely ascended. They actually started ingesting monoatomics, and they actually started to raise their megahertz level, but they did it artificially. So they're in this weird. Some of them, like Anu, would be considered like very ethereal, but not necessarily a higher density like angelic. It's not a part of the angelic realm. It's like this weird. It's hard to describe. It's like a parallel dimension where they're out of phase with our dimension, so they might seem like ethereal to us, but some of them are still physical as well. Just there's a couple that actually falsely ascended and are in this like limbo, for lack of a better term.
Are you third density or fourth density? You personally?
I consider myself, when I was in the program, a 3.5, in the sense that they used drugs and monoatomics and frequencies and other things to try to raise our megahertz level, just like the Anunnaki did. But they tailored it in a way so that you wouldn't falsely ascend into this weird, where literally it's like what you see in the movie Lucy with Scarlett Johansson when she takes that super drug, which is actually a metaphor for what I'm talking about, where she literally starts spontaneously combusting and disintegrating. She loses her cohesion because she's vibrating at such a high frequency. She is losing her cohesion, so she has to like force herself, reground herself, and integrate herself and force herself to remain solid. So that's what I'm talking about. So in the program, they give you this, like what you see in Lucy, that like super drug cocktail where you become a 3.5. And what I mean by that is you do get some of those abilities, but you don't start, falsely ascending or disintegrating or spontaneously combusting and then entering into this weird ethereal parallel reality.
Okay, so what is Tim Reef at? Is he a 3.5, a 4, a 3, or what is he?
I know he's a very, very powerful psychic. I consider him a 3.5. His abilities is like someone that's in the program, except he's one of those rare cases where he has his abilities, but he's on the ground. He's actually like a part of the ground crew or something. He's actually, because like for me, the blank slating wore off the first time, so I remember quite a bit. But I'm still trying to get those abilities back by doing major cleansing, pineal gland cleansing, monoatomics, all that stuff. And I've had some small successes in my getting some of my abilities back. So like right now I'd be like a 3.1 or 3.2. But a Tim Refat is, he's right up there. He's almost like a 3.9 maybe. I think if he were to push himself a little more, it's possible he could actually start ascending physically.
Wow. So wow, that's fascinating. Now, he doesn't say too many nice things about the Rothschilds, I've noticed. I guess that'd be putting it lightly. And so, are they powerless to stop him?
Well, I'm sure they have means of protecting themselves. They have powerful allies. Now Anu isn't really in the picture anymore, but Marduk is, Ra Marduk. So That's like Amun-Ra, Ra-Marduk, and that's a very powerful ally that they that's their lord is like they worship Ra, Amun-Ra, the light bearer Ra, Lucifer, right? So that's a very powerful ally, but I mean he's not invincible. He's just he's a fourth density being. He's still physical. So
Oh. So if there was a fourth density being right here in the room with me right now, would I see him or would I be able to touch him if you allowed me to?
oh yeah, you could touch them. They would just be a little bit, their genetics, they would just be a little bit more refined because they are vibrating at a slightly higher frequency. So they would be a little bit more refined. They would be like the typical like Nordics that people talk about, like, like the Palladians and all that. They're like the 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall blonde Nordics that can read your mind and can basically do everything that a Jedi can in terms of like telekinetic abilities. But they're physical. I mean, they still drink water, they still breathe oxygen, so that's physical.
Okay, well, what there must be some chink in their armor. Are they just complete as far as just like a being without a weapon or a spaceship or something like that? Would they be able to just overpower any human being, or do they have any weaknesses or anything like that?
It all comes back to megahertz. So if you're vibrating at if you're able to get your megahertz level up and still keep your cohesion, which is a thing unto itself, it would be just like what you see in like Dragon Ball Z, like when in that cartoon Dragon Ball Z, they charge up and their auras go expand and fire up. And so if you could like charge up your megahertz level to a point where you're pushing beyond 350 megahertz, you could actually stand a chance going up against a fourth density being, because once you pass 350, that's when you start getting to fourth density ability. And but what it would be, it wouldn't be like an actual fight, like a physical fight where you would be punching each other. It would be like the entrainment. You would literally, your auras would be colliding, and it would be a battle of wills. You would literally
it'd be like staring. You would be staring one another down, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Staring each other down, trying to reach into the other one's mind, and literally, if your megahertz level was slightly higher, then it would be like Darth Vader doing the choke. The second you were just even 1 point higher,
Mm-hmm.
you could pierce their aura, which is their armor. You could pierce the aura, and you could grab onto them using telekinetics and literally grab them, just like you see in Star Wars, or like, to use the Dragon Ball Z example, when you see the like Goku shoot an energy ball
Mm-hmm.
across the room and hit somebody. Well, in this case, in real life, an energy ball, it's not that an energy ball would actually come flying out of your hand. Again, it'd be more symbolic of you forcing your will, like more like what you see in Star Wars, actually, with the Force.
Mm-hmm.
and grabbing onto somebody.
Fascinating. Now, will Marduk or any of these fourth density beings ever die of old age?
They have life extension technology that is, I mean, they're still physical. So at some point they will expire, but they can extend their lives for hundreds of thousands of years.
Wow.
But in the grand scheme of things, yes, eventually they will have to leave the shell or the container that we call a body. They'll have to shed that, because eventually, even with them being able to regenerate their telomeres and boost their DNA, or the superconductivity of their cells with monoatomics, rather, eventually the actual body will wear out and get burnt out eventually.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Wow, it's a lot to take in. I've got to admit, I've been studying the occult and been immersed in the occult my entire life. And hearing you speak about some of these concepts, which many of them I'm well familiar with, but just the way you elucidate it and speak about it, it actually, it kind of, it broadened my understanding of it somewhat. It's that, as like Rudolf Steiner used to say, the words in our language are all correspond to the physical world. And so when you're talking about the super sensible, it's almost hard to super sensible worlds, it's almost hard to express some of these ideas because our language itself it corresponds with this world.
Very true, very true. And English is probably the worst language for describing things as well. It's because we have words that mean different things in different contexts. And a lot of there's other languages like German's very literal. It's actually probably the best language for describing things. Whereas English, like if I use the wrong word, I might actually be saying the same thing that you were thinking of. But if I just use the wrong word, you know what I mean? You'll misinterpret it. And then that causes conflict. And English is the best language for causing conflict. And I think that's why it's so prevalent on our planet because, divide and conquer is their motto and they love division. And it's unless with English, you have to choose your words so carefully that if you mess up one word, someone could take it the wrong way because that has a different meaning to them. And that causes conflict.
Yeah, and it's also a great language for deception, And there is the idea that that the English-speaking world or whatever the Germanic influence or whatever conquered the world, and of course it did in no uncertain terms. But people see that it was done with weapons and guns and stuff like that. And yes, that may be true, but in a higher or in another sense, it was actually done with the English language is what conquered the world.
Absolutely, absolutely, and English is so encoded too, as we know. If you pull apart the language, one of my favorites is individual, which means inwardly divided and dual. So inwardly divided and dual, individual. That's what an individual is. So within that, you have dualistic. Everyone's dualistic. We're stuck in duality, and so every individual is inwardly divided and dualistic. So how can 7 or 8 billion people all agree when we're inherently inwardly divided and dualistic? It's something huge to overcome.
Yes, but and at the same time, we're also purposely taught that we should embrace our individuality. You know what I mean? It's instead of just it gets tricky, and it's like Sevan Bomar, talking about understanding, as opposed to understanding, and if you're understanding something, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's fascinating.
Exactly. It's funny you mentioned Sevan Bomar. I've looked into his stuff too, and when he started to pull apart the language in his book, the Code to the Matrix and all the podcasts he's done, it really makes you look at the English language differently because it's a spell. It's like he says, it's totally encoded.
Absolutely.
It's a spell, and it's so people when they talk in English, not only does it probably always cause conflict. People argue all the time in English and misunderstand each other, but then also too, it's so encoded that people don't even realize what they're actually saying when they're using the word.
Oh, and that's by design, and so and they're using it to imprison their own selves, working against themselves. It's a language that's been weaponized.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a double-edged sword because a lot of times it's hurting you, just as much as it's hurting the others.
Yeah. And like voice commands your reality. And I'll send you some visual aids for the introduction. I know you're good at editing. So there's this chart that actually shows certain words. And if you speak these words out loud, how it actually programs your brain, like using the word can't and the word don't. This chart kind of breaks it down. Or try, like when you say I'll try instead of I will, like that's two different ways of programming yourself, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, trying doesn't get stuff done. Trying is what people usually say as an excuse after they fail. I tried. It almost rhymes with cried. That's pretty tough.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I love the etymology of the deal. Man, that's kick ass. I can't wait to have our full blown session. Now let me ask you right quick: is there like for you, is there a God or anything like that, or is it just higher forces, or is there a cosmic law, or?
I know this is controversial to say, but I think it just comes down to megahertz level. So what you might think of as a god or gods, it literally is just whoever in the universe has the highest megahertz level. I guess that would be God, and then the person or the beings with like the second highest megahertz level. if there's like a tie between a bunch of beings, then they would be the gods or the angels. And that's what I meant by the angelic realm. I didn't mean in the biblical sense like angels with harps. I meant angelic because they're resonating at such a high megahertz level. We're talking millions of megahertz levels beyond anything that a third density body could handle. So if you were to encounter a being or an entity that has a megahertz level of like 1 million, I mean, it would probably be like encountering an angel.
Oh yeah, and Rudolf Steiner, who was a mystic Christian, but I think he was pretty much at odds with Aleister Crowley. But in the occult, in the Victorian times, we speak of the angelic hierarchies, and so that's absolutely real, and a lot of people don't realize, like in the Bible, when they talk about thrones in the Bible, they're talking about they're talking about the thronos, a level of angelic beings. When they talk about powers and authorities, the exousiae, and all this stuff, they're not, they say, Jesus is sitting on a throne and he has all power and authority. It doesn't mean some guy sitting in a chair that's just real powerful. It's talking about the specific types of angels that are helping him in that one particular operation or whatever, It's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. Is there anything else we need to go over for this introduction?
No, I think that was great. I think that covered some background, and then next time I'll just jump right into the timeline when I was taken.
That's kick-ass. Kevin, you're kick-ass, man. Thanks for joining me. All right, man. There we go, y'all. Kevin Trimmel, and we are waiting to hear for the main episode. Hey, man, you have a good time tonight, all right?
You too. Thanks.
All right, later.